Welcome to another edition of Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral football YouTube show all about Notre Dame football. I'm Eric Hansen. The guy in the square next to me is Tyler James. And you guys are filling up our question queue tonight, and we are going to take your questions during the course of our show as we roll into week 2 of preseason training camp. And we had a lot of news involving Notre Dame today, including an injury to a starter on the offensive line. We're going to get to all that and more. Tyler's going to give you some of the ground rules, and then we'll get off and get started.
Yeah. First off, thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate those of you who have already been commenting in the chat. Brian, Sid, Jeff, Bob. We see you. We appreciate you. Like Eric mentioned, you can send us questions throughout the show. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to allow yourself to easily see all of our content. And also, we're trying something new. If you need to be subscribed in order to submit messages during the live show. So an extra encouragement if you're just sitting here not subscribed to us and you want to chat with us. Now you got to do that. We're closing in on 3,000 subscribers. So every single subscriber matters, and we appreciate you hitting that button. You can also turn on the bell for notifications for our videos. And then obviously like the video, send comments either during the show or later on replay. All those things help us get in front of more people. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, depending on how urgently you have a question, if you're not a subscriber to InsideNDSports.com, now is a good time to change that. Use promo code NDYT when you sign up to get a 30-day free trial, which gives you access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us over on the Insider Lounge, where we spend a lot of our time and share our inside information. First, there is a link to sign up for that deal in the video description below.
I'm really glad you did that part. We are taking stock of Notre Dame football as preseason camp moves into week number 2. Notre Dame players started preseason training camp on Wednesday. The Irish are at 86 scholarship players that we know of, one over the NCAA limit. And that limit is not going to be around much after this year. It's on track to increase to a 105 roster limit, of which Notre Dame can make all of those scholarship players. But they still have to adhere to the 85 this year, and they don't have to be there until August 27th, which is the first day of fall semester class. So our opening drive today was going to be about the offensive line, defensive line driven program. We were going to start with the offensive line, and we still are. But our first bit of news is the status of Charles Jaga, a sophomore left tackle, the number 1 left tackle on the Notre Dame depth chart. I'm going to let Tyler, since he did the story, go through what happened with Charles Jaga and where Notre Dame stands.
Yeah, so Notre Dame announced today, Monday, that in Saturday's practice, which would have been the 4th preseason practice for Notre Dame, that Charles Jaga tore the right pectoral muscle in his chest, and that will require surgery, and it's expected for him to be out for the remainder of the 2024 season. So out of the lineup before the season gets started, and as I'm sure you all know, he was expected to be Notre Dame's starting left tackle, and one of the few sort of certainties going into this preseason camp of who was going to be a probable starter. 6'7", 330-pound sophomore, only played in 2 games last year, but started the last game in the Sun Bowl, and it carried that momentum into the offseason, and it looked like I said, sort of guaranteed that he was going to be Notre Dame's starting left tackle unless something like this happened. So the question now is, what's next for Notre Dame? Obviously, there's been a competition at right tackle. Do you move one of those guys over, whether it's Emil Wagner or Tosh Baker? Anthony Knapp, a freshman, has been the number 2 left tackle behind Jaga. Sullivan Abshire, I think, could be moved out of his left guard role. He'd been slid down there after being a tackle earlier in his career. And then Gabriel Lambert, I think, is the sort of intriguing freshman that might be asking a lot of him to be competing here in preseason camp, but somewhere down the line maybe can find a role at either the right or left tackle positions.
So, in other words, everybody that has a T next to their name on the roster, except for Styles Prescott, is in the mix. And that's the way it should be, honestly. On a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of angst factor, what do you think is reasonable for people at home to be dealing with their angst about what this is going to look like? Not so much down the road during the season, but against probably the best defensive front Notre Dame is going to play the entire season.
Well, I don't want to dictate your angst, but I would say pretty high. Like
it's just suggestive.
8, 9, 10. I mean, I have been if not the foremost leader. I'm sorry that there's someone more negative out there than me, but I've just been very negative about the prospects of Notre Dame's tackle positions this offseason and what sort of quality play Notre Dame was going to get from those positions this season. This arguably, and I think almost inarguably, he takes the best of the tackle options off of the field. And then you're going to be relying on guys that maybe you didn't want to have to rely on this season. So I think, especially in that season opener, which that's one of the strengths of Texas A&M's team, should be rushing off the edge. And you got a loud environment, a new quarterback. This is a tall task for Joe Rudolph to prepare this offensive line, which already had enough moving pieces on it already to figure out who's going to be the starting left tackle now.
My thought is that the long-term solution and the Texas A&M solution might not be the same guy.
Yeah.
Just off the top of your head, what are your thoughts just to that part of it? And then we'll go through who we think should be getting ready for Texas A&M.
Yeah, I'm sort of torn. I think to me on paper it makes more sense to move Emil Wagner over. He is the more athletic tackle of the two guys who are competing at right tackle between him and Tosh Baker. He's 6'6", 290 pounds, depending on whenever that was updated. Tosh Baker, 6'8", 320 pounds.
It was updated in June.
And Wagner is more fleet of foot than Tosh Baker. I think that is fair to say. I think anyone with an unbiased analysis would say that. Although I think you could argue that Wagner maybe isn't as athletic as you would think for someone who is undersized, or at least hasn't shown that in a football point of view. So you wonder if he needs to stay at right tackle. Tosh Baker is the one who's actually played games at left tackle. So if you're going into a hostile environment and you want some experience in that season opener, Tosh Baker would make some sense to move over to left tackle. I think I personally would move over Wagner. But I think I could understand if Baker was your choice. I think for the opener, I think it's hard to go beyond those two options, though. I'm not sure that you can feel abundantly confident in any of those other options because they're all inexperienced, right? And it's not like Wagner or Tosh Baker are truly experienced, though Baker has some starts, but even Wagner played for the first time last year only as a reserve and at right tackle. So I think this is a tough situation for Joe Rudolph. So I don't know if I wrap myself in too many answers there, but what do you think, Eric? What would your solution be?
My solution would be to have that decision made by the end of the week, and I would try a couple things there. My concern about moving Wagner is, do you weaken yourself at two positions? Do you take a guy that is really starting to get it at right tackle, starting to ascend, and then move him to a new position all of a sudden where he's not starting from scratch, but he's not where he was at right tackle? You're right with Baker having had experience over there. He certainly has length. I mean, he's 6'8". He's got long arms.
Right.
Former college basketball prospect that we actually thought would develop quicker and more decisively than he has. I mean, he was at one point a top 100 prospect and I think landed just outside the top 100. Emil Wagner was kind of in that same boat, but I do think it's probably going to be one of the two of them. Had Sullivan Abshire been working at tackle all of fall camp and all of summer, I might have thrown him in that mix for the short-term solution, but he's been working at guard. He may be part of the long-term solution. And then I'm eliminating for now Gabriel Lambert and Anthony Knapp. I don't think maybe down the road those guys are your better options, but I think when we're looking at Texas A&M, I would look to see if Baker or Wagner are better. And my sense is that Baker's going to be the guy who ends up there, but I'm not convinced of that yet because I think they're going to audition people. And we're going to talk to Joe Rudolph tomorrow morning. As long as he's going to say this is a picnic, talking to the media versus trying to figure this whole thing out. So that would be my thought there. Now somebody might say, well, Joe Rudolph and Harry Heastan before him says, hey, we're going to play our best 5 linemen. We don't care what position they are. Why wouldn't you move Pat Coogan or Rocco Spindler out there? And I know what the answer is, but I want you to tell people why that is not an option.
Yeah, I don't know that those guys have the length that you want at the position. I don't know that they necessarily have the quickness either. I think they're guards for a reason. And I think they're, whether or not, regardless of who's the starter is, I think the other one's probably going to have some playing time at some point at guard this season, or even maybe center if there's a center issue. I think Pat Coogan seems like a realistic backup center option if he is not a starting guard, if something were to happen to Ashton Craig. So I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to move those guys out there. They've had their hands full with the assignments they were given at guard, and I just don't know that I would like their odds of being able to adapt to playing that tackle position, especially after spending so much time working as interior linemen during their Notre Dame careers.
And then long term, let's say, the bye week pops up early in October. So you're going to have 5 games under Notre Dame's belt by the time they get to the bye week. What's your thought about somebody like Gabriel Lambert or Anthony Knapp maybe being able to overtake, kind of like the Joe Alt situation in 2021, where he came in, I think, just before the bye week, and they made a change on the left side of the line and put Joe Alt when Tosh Baker had been struggling, Michael Carmody had struggled, and Blake Fisher got injured. So what's your thought about those two?
I mean, Lambert looks the part, right?
Yeah, he does.
You can't really doubt, like, okay, who's that guy? Like he's like, if you lined him up with your number ones, you would be like, why is that guy out there? Now maybe once the whistle blows, you'd start.
He'd be number one on my bodyguard list. I would pick him.
So we have yet to see him do much physically in terms of moving guys around. So I think that's the biggest hurdle for him, other than just learning the playbook, to be in a position to compete after just joining the team in the summer, because he was not an early enrollee. Knapp was an early enrollee. A long time Joe Rudolph was recruiting him back during his time at Virginia Tech before he came to Notre Dame. So obviously likes Anthony Knapp a lot. Knapp was given the chance to work at some center and tackle going back to this winter when he was an early enrollee. So someone that Rudolph obviously has confidence in and likes his ability to be flexible. Knapp is undersized as well. I think he's only 6'4", 291, maybe has some longer arms to make up for that. But I mean, Robert Hainsey was able to do it. Robert Hainsey isn't a prototypical offensive tackle either, but he wasn't not being asked to play left tackle either, and he was doing it in a rotation with Tommy Kramer. So I think that would be what Notre Dame would be asking Anthony Knapp to do would be a bit more difficult, I think, than what Robert Hainsey was asked to do. But we'll see. Obviously, like I said, there's trust in him. I like his mean streak. I always thought he was holding a lot and being sort of unnecessarily reckless, which I think as a college coach, Joe Rudolph should be able to sort of rein that in. But I think of those two, I would like Lambert eventually, but I don't know if by October I'm not necessarily ready for Lambert either. So we'll see what sort of development those guys have, because I don't think either of them are sort of ready to be sort of thrown to the wolves right now.
We're talking Notre Dame offensive line here on Football Never Sleeps. Notre Dame, incidentally, ended up at number 7 in the coaches preseason poll. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We're going to get to questions here after I get through this one with Tyler. Here's my wild card is Sullivan Abshire.
Yeah.
And what I would ask you right at this point is, do you need to move him back to tackle now? Whether he's going to be the starter or a backup, is the guard audition for him over? Do you need to move him?
I think so. Because you already have three options at guard that you like, with Shrouth, Coogan, and Spindler. And I think you could argue that even Pendleton, even though he's been working at center, would be someone that Notre Dame would be comfortable playing at guard. Whereas I don't know your list of who you're comfortable playing at tackle. If it's too deep right now, you might be stretching it. So I think that's would be worth entertaining. I know he's been spending time at guard and trying to push into that competition, but he at least brings some good size to that. I think he's a pretty good athlete, 6'7", 321 pounds he's listed as. And as Eric mentioned earlier, those heights and weights, unless they've been updated without us knowing it, were last updated in June. So we're not sure how exact those are to what those guys are here in August. But I do think Sullivan Abshire is someone that could fill into the tackle role. Now, maybe he would be a guy that would be better suited after the bye week to sort of replace a Tosh Baker in the starting lineup, if that's what happened, whether that's on the left or right side. So I think that's something that I would entertain, and I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Rudolph felt the same way.
Okay, are we ready to take a run through the question queue? And we'll try to do the offensive line-ish questions early.
All right. Bob Bolt asked, with Lauren Landau's help, has Tosh Baker improved his quickness and agility?
It hasn't been apparent to me in the one full practice and the two partials that we've seen, but I couldn't go the other way. What I will say is this, that anytime you seem to ask a player about Lauren Lando and his ability to make these position-specific drills, the guys have been really, really happy. I talked to Emil. Maybe you talked to Tosh in the spring. I talked to Emil in the spring, and he went through everything that Lauren was doing to help him not only get to the weight he needed, but to improve his agility and improve his skill set. And that was a pretty long answer. And so I would assume there is. I'm surprised we didn't get, how could Lauren Lando allow an injury to happen in preseason camp? Because I know we'll get some of that, but that's a good question. How about you, Tyler? I mean, is there something tangible you saw?
No, I haven't. But we've seen very limited amounts. I think it's worth reestablishing that. We saw one full practice. It was the first full practice. And then we saw the first 5 periods of the second and third practices. And in all those practices, Tosh Baker was the number 2 right tackle. They're not wearing full pads. They're not doing much one-on-one against actual live defensive players. So I don't spend a lot of time watching that because there's just not that much you can learn about those guys. And there's more you can learn at the other positions. And when you have limited time, you sort of have to make those choices. Obviously, offensive line is a huge question mark going into the season, but I just don't know what I'm going to learn watching these guys go half motion through combo blocks. Like, it's just not, I'm not going to get the answers that I'm looking for, even as someone that has watched a lot of offensive line play. So I don't know if that improvement is there. You'd like to hope it was, but Tosh Baker is also a very veteran player. So how much can he change what he is? And that's my concern with Tosh Baker, is that the hope for what Tosh Baker could become, I don't think ever really happened. And I'm not sure that you can sort of reverse it and sort of get rid of some of those deficiencies this late in his career. But if he can, that would be certainly a hat tip to him and Lauren Lando if for whatever role that he played in that. And I think we're probably going to get a better sense for that here in the next few weeks.
Any more from the queue, or do you want to keep? Okay, there we go.
I got another one from Brian Habermel. With Denbrock's offense mostly being wider with 3 wide or detached tight ends, players in motion, do you think it's logical to prioritize pass blocking / blocking in space for the next offensive tackle?
I think you got to be able to do both. And Marcus Freeman mentioned this in his press conference on Wednesday when I asked him about offensive line play and what he wanted to see. And Mike Denbrock didn't say, you know what, Marcus was wrong. They want to be able to be a physical running team and to be able to do that well. And I think that's also going to be emphasized. I don't think that's going to take a back seat to pass blocking. So I think both will get emphasized with all of them, not just who the next offensive tackle is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't rely too heavily on one. I would it's got to be someone you're comfortable in pass protection with, but there are things that I think Notre Dame will have to do to protect that offensive tackle if that person can't handle those responsibilities on their own, whether it's chipping with the running back, using more tight ends to help with the pass protection, some quick throws, which certainly will be a part of the game. Keeping the defensive ends honest with Riley Leonard's legs will be certainly an important part of that. So there's a lot of different things that Notre Dame can do. And I, regardless of the Charles Jaga injury, expected Notre Dame to do to sort of try to protect its offensive tackles, because I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be a strength for Notre Dame as those guys continue to develop. So I think just you find someone who's capable, competent, consistent. I think that's especially if you're dealing with people with deficiencies, someone that you know what you're going to get from, or can complete the assignment, which maybe that's why Tosh Baker can end up being in such a strong position here, because if anyone should know the ins and outs of college football offensive line play at this point on Notre Dame's offensive line, you would like to think someone that's been here for as long as he had would be towards the top of that list. So this happening, especially now in camp, might be a situation where Tosh Baker can take advantage of and then maybe prove some of the doubters wrong, that he can overcome some of those issues that have prevented him from becoming a full-time starter during his Notre Dame career. Okay. All right. Let me see if there are any questions that came through while I was
While Tyler is sifting through that, I'm going to go through some of the other news today. Marty Auer also is out for the season. Marty, you're probably saying, who is Marty Auer? Marty is a guy that plays safety for Notre Dame. He's a walk-on, but you'll know him more for special teams. So that's a guy that was competing for a special teams spot. He suffered an injury. He's also out for the year. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Notre Dame is number 7 in the coaches poll. The AP poll will come out a week from today at noon Eastern time. And
send all your complaints to Eric for that.
Send your complaints to that. I can share with you that on my ballot, I had Notre Dame at number 6. I think number 7 is a fair spot for them. This was before the injury, so people may
ask, would you change your vote with this injury news?
No, because I thought that the A&M game was going to be a tight game anyways. And I think Notre Dame, if it can get through the A&M game with the plan B option, by the time they hit the gristle in their schedule, whoever is the plan B option is going to be pretty good. Also, I get to change my vote every week, so I'm not locked into that preseason, but I still think Notre Dame could be pretty good. This just adds a dimension of uncertainty to whether they can develop into that kind of team. I mean, it's not like they don't have good prospects. What they don't have is experience. And, they could have certainly gone to the transfer portal in the spring for some depth. And yet I don't think there were a lot of attractive options that were willing to come to Notre Dame and maybe be a backup. So that's how I would look at that. And then we had more watch stuff today, and there's too much to catch up with. Okay, I tap danced, and Tyler's ready with a question.
Another offensive line question from Jeff Stevens. We know what question number 1 will be for Rudolph this week. What will question number 2 be?
What was question number 1? No, I'm just kidding. That actually was in my show notes of what I was going to ask Tyler. So, Tyler, I'll ask you, what was your old answer? Had you formulated that before the injury happened today?
No, I had not formulated that. I mean, I think there's any number of ways you can go about the questions that we'll ask Joe Rudolph. And because it's a group setting, you don't get to dictate the first question necessarily or the follow-ups to it.
Usually it's how you doing, coach?
Yeah. Or can we get a fan pointed towards you? How many options are realistic at left tackle now? I think that's what, we have all these names, but I don't know how many of these are realistic. I don't know that Joe Rudolph will necessarily pare it down. But I think sometimes you can sort of tell by the way they talk about players, just how confident they are in them. So that would probably be question one. And I think question two would have to be some sort of follow-up based on the response to question number one, just because I don't know that there's another topic that's worth addressing to that extent. I would be curious if we're moving away from the tackle thing,
right?
What does this, and I guess it's somewhat related, tangential, does the left tackle situation change what you value at your left guard position? Do you need something, and does it matter who's at left tackle to who you like at left guard? I know best five is sort of, I think it's a cliche now in terms of offensive line play, but do you need someone that's maybe sharper on their ins and outs of the offensive line that can help along an inexperienced left tackle at left guard, or can you rely on and you would like to think that both Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan should be able to fit that because they both were starters last year, but we know that's not always the case. Just because you were out there doesn't mean you knew everything that was going on. So I think I'm sort of curious if there's any sort of impact to that left guard role based on what happens at this left tackle position too.
Yeah, my thought, there were a couple roads that I would like to go down once we get the left tackle thing settled, and we'll have time to ask other questions. One is, I think a lot of people are curious, what did Emil Wagner show Joe Rudolph and the rest of the coaching staff that he was chasing Baker through spring, and then over the summer he surfaces? So what happened during the summer? What are they seeing early in these workouts that make them think he's the best option at right tackle? I'd want to know that. I'd also want to know, irrespective of the left tackle situation, again, let's say that didn't happen, what's going to determine the Coogan-Spindler winner at left guard? What do they need to see? And I would also ask, how realistic was it that they thought Sullivan Abshire could make that a three-man competition? I don't think it is, but if they moved him with the thought that he could make that a three-man competition at some point. But I am curious what they value in Coogan and Spindler as far as traits, because they do have different strengths, and each one of them has been deemed the number one option at a guard position at one point or another. And so it'll be curious to me how that plays out. Okay, do you want to move on to the next topic, or do you want to do some questions that may or may not have to do with offensive line? Tyler, it's your pick.
My internet really spiked there, so you were jumbled for me, but I do have some more offensive line questions, so I was going to continue with those.
Okay.
We Are Not Marshall asked Tyler/Eric, if we use 4 different left tackles this season, what does that say of how the season went?
Well, I mean, in 2021, it actually went pretty well with 4 offensive tackles at left tackle. So I would say it's a rerun. But I think you want to get that plan B right for Texas A&M. And again, we mentioned in the beginning that answer for the long term might be somebody else. You may say, you know what, Gary Lambert is going to really, really be good. If we invest reps in him early in the season, once we get to the Northern Illinois, Purdue, Miami stretch, then maybe by the time they hit Louisville, which has really good pass rushers as well, not on Texas A&M's level, but good pass rushers, that maybe this will be a great investment. That's kind of how Notre Dame looked at Joe Alt at a point, was that they just said, you know what, this guy is a freshman. We had been using him in some jumbo packages over on the right side. It's time to put him in there and see what he can do. At the very least, he's going to bring more physicality. I would think the same with Lambert. I think the one thing he is going to do is he's going to be a physical guy. But sometimes if your head's spinning and you don't know what you're doing, you don't play as physical. So it'll be really curious to me how well Gary Lambert practices. But I think he could be part of the long-term solution. So I didn't answer your question straight with math. The other thing, Tyler, when you were talking about the best 5, I do think where it applies a little bit is when people look at our depth charts, they're like, well, why wouldn't Anthony Knapp move up? He's listed as the number 2 left tackle. He's been practicing. Sometimes your next best option is playing another position or playing the other side. Okay, I'm done with that. So.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. And yeah, that is the right way to think about it. I just think if you're describing an offensive line coach, what his philosophy is, I think most coaches are like that. I don't know that there's many coaches that say, no, unless you're like at the NFL level and you get to pick who you got, like you're more hand selecting who you want.
Well, it seemed like even when we're recruiting, Harry seemed to get a lot more tackles and he'd move them to guard or center. It seems like Joe Rudolph recruits tackles, but he also recruits guys that are interior guys. It seems like there's more of that specialization.
Yeah, I think there has been some of that. Although, I mean, some of the guys. I mean, Peter Jones is a guard, and that was inherited from Harry Hiestand. That wasn't necessarily. But Anthony Knapp is someone who's, I think, versatile. I think some people thought he'd be an interior lineman. Obviously, now he's at tackle. So there is some of that. Certainly in this 2025 recruiting class, Notre Dame has all tackles and has been really trying to get those. But I think probably some of those guys, or at least one of those guys, maybe ends up at guard. So,
right.
But back to the question from We Are Not Marshall. I think it all just depends on who the last tackle is and how that person fares. Like, I think you could get through a few different guys. And still have a good season, as long as you're not making the decision only based on the fact that left tackle lost you the game or something like that. So I think you can navigate it. I think it certainly it would seem unreasonable to predict Notre Dame to go undefeated while using 4 different left tackles. You would have to imagine that at least one loss would be sprinkled in there, but I think Notre Dame could probably. It's not unrealistic or impossible for Notre Dame to still get to the playoff if it used 4 left tackles, as long as whoever that last left tackle is someone that's long lasting and can really solidify that offensive line. Another one from We Are Not Marshall. How does this impact the schemes that Denbrock wants to run?
I would say he's going to at least in the Texas A&M game, he's going to have to modify that a little bit. I mean, not completely change the scheme, but I think some of the things Tyler said about having a running back helping out or having a tight end helping out, I think uniquely to the Texas A&M game, I think once they get past that with Miami, Purdue, and Northern Illinois, I think, again, maybe they can get into less of the helping out that tackle, just depending on how they come along and how they come out of the Texas A&M game. But, I think it is what it is. I mean, Texas A&M has, if you could line up the edge pass rushers, you can make the argument that they have 1 and 2 on the opponent list, at least 1 and 3 or 1 and 4. I mean, you're talking about some of the best pass rushers, and you're talking about NFL prospects at the defensive end position.
Yeah, I think, again, maybe it just sounds like I'm sticking to my own talking points, but I think the offense was going to be dictated around maybe not having the best tackles, and that's not the strength of Notre Dame's offense. So I don't think it'll impact it greatly. I think it could make some play calling choices a little bit more different. But I do think that Mike Denbrock should have been planning to protect his offensive tackles, and this only heightens the need to do that with his offensive game plans.
The one thing too is Notre Dame wanted to be balanced, and the more you can be balanced against Texas A&M, the better it is for you, because then they're not teeing up. It's not always 3rd and long. If you can run the ball, you can take yourselves out of some of the 3rd and longs and being predictable.
Yeah, and I think we're spending all this time talking about Jaga, the loss of Jagusa and him being a left tackle. The natural reaction is the impact that it makes to the pass protection, but I think the impact in run blocking is huge too. I think that's actually the better of the two skill sets for Charles Jagusa at this point, in my opinion. I think he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker. right now. So I think that loss will be felt in the running game as well, not just in pass protection. All right, I think that's it for questions.
Okay, we're going to go to defensive line next. We're going to have a chance to talk to Al Washington and some of the defensive line. Gabe Rubio suffered a broken bone in his left foot on the first day of camp. Tyler, what do we know about the injury and who steps up? And is there a this is a 3-part question. It's almost 17-part, which I don't allow in my chats. Who steps up? Is there a sufficient defensive line? Let's start with what the injury is and how long. What do we know about it? Because how long is one of the head scratchers?
Yeah, he has a fractured second metatarsal, which isn't an injury that I have a lot of experience covering. Like I went back, I tried to look to see if there was any mentions of a second metatarsal on the Insider Lounge in the past, and there wasn't. And so I don't have like a correlation of someone from Notre Dame's recent past, or I mean, I guess I've covered Notre Dame for a little bit more than recent at this point, but there's no one that came to mind.
Do you have any gray hair yet, Tyler?
There's some in my beard.
Okay.
So I don't really know. To me, the immediate surgery that he had the day of the injury suggested there's a belief that he'll be back this season, and it was important to get that done. My guess is we were looking at October as maybe a time that he can get back. I don't know how realistic that is. I think like the foot fractures that I think were most commonly, Lisfranc, and then a Jones fracture, which is the 5th metatarsal. Lisfranc is one of the midfoot ones. I don't know if it has to always be the second or third. I don't know what it is, but it was not described as that. So I don't think it's and Lisfranc typically is more long-term. So I think that may be a good sign for Gabriel Rubio, but we don't really have concrete answers at this point. So this is just speculation and relying on some of the information we've had from past experience.
I think just in my memory, as far as foot injuries in general, it does seem like the skill guys heal faster than the big linemen, offensive or defensive, with those foot injuries. But when I had a chance to talk with defensive coordinator Al Golden in a group setting late last week on Friday, he didn't seem overly concerned with how long Rubio would be out or who was coming up to fill in those spots. So why don't we talk about who's going to fill in the defensive interior line spots depth-wise?
Yeah, well, Jason Anye was always someone that we expected to have a role. I think there's just more pressure on him to step up now. I think now we'll see some real time for Donovan Heinisch, who is someone that I highlighted previously as someone that Al Washington routinely praises. So we'll get a chance to see him more. And then the one that maybe is the most unexpected would be Armel Mukum, someone that missed the spring with a shoulder injury and came to Notre Dame as a defensive end initially, but has slid inside. I think he is in the mix there. Cole Mullins is another person that's getting some mention. He's another guy that came to Notre Dame as a defensive end. I mean, I think he maybe even finished his high school career ranked as a linebacker on Rivals because he missed his senior year. But Cole Mullins has really ascended there on the interior. And Sean Civillano, I think, is one of those guys in the mix as well. So those are all names to know. I think Anye and Heinisch are the most important. Muka maybe has the inside track right now, but certainly plenty of time for different options to assert themselves there.
Yeah, and Armel is a guy that really surprised me. I think the name that you didn't mention that people say, wait, what is Brennon Vernon. I got asked about that in chat on Saturday just because Brennan was such a highly ranked prospect. And I'll let you jump in here, Tyler, in a second. But Brennon Vernon came in as a defensive end, a large defensive end, and the thought was he may have a future at either of those positions, defensive tackle or the large field defensive end. He's still changing his body to be a defensive tackle. He was in the 260s in June. Again, the lady that puts together the heights and weights did confirm that those were from mid-June. And I'm sure we're going to be getting refresh numbers here pretty soon. But when I asked Al Golden about Brennon Vernon on Friday. He said, yeah, he's developing, he's coming along, and I think really realistically, when we'll hear about Brennon Vernon either competing or flattening out, is going to be next year. I think the thought was get his body right so that he can compete at defensive tackle. They still like a lot of the traits about him that made him a borderline high 4-star, kind of 5-star guy during the recruiting process. So I would not write him off.
Yeah, I think patience is important there. I think it's easy, and I understand the concern given the recent example of Tyson Ford. It feels a lot like Tyson Ford, and someone that was highly recruited as a defensive end, moving back and forth between positions. And Tyson Ford never really found the playing field at Notre Dame. So,
and yet Mucom and Mullins weren't as highly recruited, and they made those moves.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing preventing that from happening.
Yeah.
But if Mucom and Mullins play and establish themselves, it becomes even harder to pass them up. So, it's still wait and see. It's way too early to sort of throw up a red flag there. But I think I understand people that are like, what's going on with Brennon Vernon? Why isn't Brennon Vernon in the mix here? Because it sort of feels a little bit like deja vu with this coaching staff on the defensive line with a highly recruited defensive end.
And so then when we get a chance to talk to Al Washington, if we're not worn out from asking offensive line questions to Joe Rudolph, what would be your first question? What would you want to most know about from your observations and asking Al about?
I'm curious, like, who's the best pass rusher on the edge specifically. I don't want to hear about Howard Cross or Riley Mills. Who's your best edge rusher? Is it Jordan Botelho? Is it Boubacar Traore? Is it RJ Oben? I'm not sure that we know the answer to that. There doesn't have to be a clear answer to that, especially if all those guys are really good. But I'm curious if Al Washington feels confident in what those guys can do, and if he sees a lot of guys winning one-on-one matchups on the edge that can really make a difference in what this defense can look like. Ready for.
Okay. Your sound just broke up a little bit, so I'm hoping that you're not freezing up. Your head's moving around, so that's a good sign. Okay, we're going to either take questions, Tyler, or we can talk quarterback really quick. We can't do a show without talking about the quarterback, Riley Leonard. So what do you want to do here?
Let's talk quarterbacks. We only have one recruiting question so far. If you have questions, submit them. There is lots of conversation in the chat, but not questions heading our way. People talking to each other, which I appreciate the passion.
Okay. So what do we see from Riley Leonard and the others, and what haven't we seen in the 3 media windows that we've been a part of? And we'll get our 4th one tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I don't expect us to see that much more tomorrow that we haven't seen with it being a small window. But Riley Leonard looks the best to me. He's most consistently on target and in rhythm with the wide receivers. I think the caution is that most of what looked best of Riley Leonard's game in those 3 practices that we saw was that most of his best work was done on air. Like, it wasn't against the defense. The offensive passing game was not on point in the first practice, which isn't necessarily surprising given the talent on Notre Dame's defense. But that's just the reality of what we saw. So there's room for improvement in live action. Obviously, we're not going to see a lot of Riley Leonard running in practice settings. Right. So that would be something that will be an important part of the offense that we're not going to get a great sense for this camp. I still think Steve Angeli is capable. I think there is an obvious gap between the two of them, but I think he's in the conversation for best number 2 quarterbacks in the country. I haven't seen as much of Minchie and Carr other than some of the on-air stuff. So I don't know that my opinions on them has changed much. It's about the same of what we knew of them from the spring. I guess the other thing that maybe we haven't seen of, I mean, beyond maybe some clips here or there that Notre Dame has shared on social media, is a lot of deep connections. That wasn't necessarily a big part of the game in the first practice, beyond some like broken coverage opportunities where someone just got beat really badly. and it wasn't necessarily the winner or the receiver making some incredible catch against some tight coverage.
Yeah, and some of what we do, besides us seeing things with our own eyes, we kind of read the coaches. Are they just, is it coach speak, or are they legitimately excited about a player? In terms of Riley Leonard, do you feel like Marcus Freeman, Mike Denbrock, Gina Gaduli, who we haven't spoken to yet, the third one there, they say, you know what, Riley Leonard is who we thought he was. That's why he's taken the number one reps in practice.
Yeah, I think so. And while like Marcus Freeman didn't name Riley Leonard the starter, he's with the ones. He didn't say we got a plan to rotate those guys and we're going to figure it out. He didn't outright name him, but he didn't necessarily make it seem like Steve Angeli was beating down the doors to be the number one quarterback either. So I think he has been as advertised. Obviously, the off-season surgeries that he had to have threw a bit of a wrench in allowing the progress to happen like you'd like, and the experience to develop with those receivers. But I think from some of the things on the field, and I think a lot of the things off the field, Riley Leonard's exactly what they thought Notre Dame was getting.
Okay. As far as the wide receivers, let's touch on them really quickly. What was your general impression from the wide receiver group?
Well, because I've caught a lot of drops on film, that has some concern to me. I know it happens, but they're even in some pretty basic drills, the wide receivers had some drops. Maybe I'm just there when they're at their absolute worst, but that is of some concern to me. You like the sort of different sizes and shapes and the different possibilities that Notre Dame has there, and I do expect them to be improved. But they're not blowing me away necessarily at this point, which I don't know that I expected them to anyways. But I think it's a good group, but still has a lot to prove. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen as many of the drops because you've been filming them and I've been watching the lines more than I've been watching the receivers.
Well, you can watch them on youtube.com/.
That's true. I need to catch up. I've been driving, so I have to catch up. I
not just you, the audience as well. That was not specific to you. No.
But I do like the speed at wide receiver. I mean, Jaden Harrison caught my eye, and I need to see why that he wasn't used more as a receiver at Marshall. He was the number 2 kickoff returner in the country. And I asked him, he goes, coaches coach, players play. But he also felt like the transfer to Notre Dame was to enhance his receiver skills. So I thought that was kind of an interesting answer. While we're kind of in the quarterback receiver realm, let's hit this recruiting nugget about what's going on with Duce Knight, the 2025 quarterback commit from Lucedale, Mississippi. What can you share with our audience?
Yeah, that was the question I referred to earlier that Jeff Stevens submitted, as you can
imagine.
I
did it just as eloquently as Jeff did.
Yeah, I don't like Notre Dame's chances at this point. Notre Dame is continuing to recruit him, but Auburn and Ole Miss, I think more Auburn than Ole Miss is really pushing with a realistic chance to flip him. And we'll see. I think this is an important week that Notre Dame has to get through if Duce Knight is going to stick with his commitment. But even at that point, like if Duce Knight remains committed to Notre Dame through this week, I don't think that guarantees that he stays committed through September or beyond that. So this has become a real problem for Notre Dame, and one that Notre Dame has to prepare a backup plan for, but can't really proceed with a backup plan unless it's absolutely certain that Duce Knight isn't coming here, because that's how much Notre Dame likes Duce Knight. And I think a lot of people like Duce Knight that much because he's a really talented quarterback, and he would be a tremendous loss for Notre Dame in this class if he decided to exit for another class.
Okay, so this may require some tea leaves on your part, Tyler. So if you need to run out of the room to grab them, but why is this happening?
I keep them in this drawer right here.
Okay, why is this happening though? I mean, you have this guy, he commits to Notre Dame, and he's selling Notre Dame, and he's made multiple trips from Lucedale, Mississippi up to Notre Dame to help with the recruiting efforts. And then all of a sudden he takes these visits to Auburn and Ole Miss. So people would say, well, is this NIL related? Is he getting homesick? Is he starting to think about, hey, you know what? That's a long way up to Notre Dame. It's going to snow there at some point. Is he looking at Noah Grubbs behind him and CJ Carr in front of him and doesn't see a clean enough path to playing time? So what's your best guesstimate on that?
I don't think it can be boiled down to one thing.
Okay.
I think that is, especially anymore, everyone wants to say NIL. I don't think it's that significant, whatever is available to Duce Knight at Auburn or Ole Miss versus what's available to him at Notre Dame. I don't think that is the main reason. I'm sure he's going to be paid handsomely wherever he ends up. I think there is a push to stay in the South. There is maybe some regrets of not looking into that as much as maybe he should have last year when he decided to commit to Notre Dame. I think it's worth remembering there was kind of a pressure play with Duce Knight and his recruitment in that Notre Dame really wanted to get him in the class. And while Duce Knight was still trying to make up his mind, Bear Bachmeier was being pushed as someone to come on campus and could potentially commit. And maybe that rushed Duce Knight's decision. Now, that didn't show up for months and months now, but I think that maybe circling back some into this process now when he's reevaluating his options. He's always kept lines of communications open with other programs and has been transparent about that. But only recently, I think, has started to really explore those other opportunities. And I think he's seeing things that maybe are opening his eyes, whether or not it's truthful or not. But I think he's really falling in love with the sales pitches that other places, particularly Auburn, are giving him. And he's not the only one in his recruitment, right? I think there's family involved, and that's not specific to Duce Knight. There's plenty of recruits that have family involved in their recruitment, and that are affected by that, and the ability to stay closer to home. I think probably is playing some role, whether or not anyone wants to admit that. But Notre Dame's not getting any closer to Mississippi, and Auburn and Ole Miss certainly are a lot closer. So I think there's a lot of things at play here, and I don't think it's just one. This is the price you pay of recruiting someone from the South that maybe isn't your typical Notre Dame recruit, and may have some other opportunities. Obviously, the reason why teams are pushing for him is because he's so talented. So that speaks to what Notre Dame was able to do, but it doesn't really matter if you can't keep him in the class. So we'll see what happens moving forward. Notre Dame's going to have to be strong with another backup plan. Certainly, Notre Dame is recruiting from a position of strength with what it has in CJ Carr in the freshman class and Noah Grubbs in the 2026 class. But I don't think you can really minimize what a loss this would be if Duce Knight leaves the class.
Two questions, and then if we've got some more from the viewers, let's take them. But if you had to bet all the possessions in that room right now on who was going to have the best chance of being a future Notre Dame starting quarterback, and Duce Knight came back into the class, would you bet on CJ Carr, Duce Knight, or Noah Grubbs? They're all ranked very similarly, kind of between 44 and 53 in the rankings in their respective classes.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion was, and I think we would have to go back and find the taste, but I've always felt that CJ Carr was the one that I was the most bullish on. I was very impressed with what I saw from Duce Knight this summer in the different settings, and got to spend some time with him in person down in Jacksonville at the Rivals 5-star. So I think he has a very bright future as well. I think the timing of things we're probably going to play into CJ Carr's favor with him being when there's the next chance for an opening role. I think he would have a foot up on Duce Knight there. And so I do think CJ Carr would have been the best bet. But Duce Knight is the kind of guy that, I mean, the sky is the limit for him. He has great athleticism. He has a great arm. And I think if he fully develops in what he can be, is going to be a really great player. CJ Carr maybe is a little bit safer. Not that he can't be great too. I think the highs of highs for CJ Carr can be very high too. So that was how I always felt. That I know if you're an Auburn fan, you're probably like, oh, you're just saying that because you're about to lose Duce Knight, but that's how I have felt. If Duce Knight leaves, I still think there's a chance that he sort of reaches those high highs as well. But CJ Carr seemed like the best bet to me. Do you share that opinion?
I also feel like CJ Carr has definitely the highest floor of those guys, and I think he may have the highest ceiling. I would bet on CJ Carr if I had to bet all your possessions in that room. Is there somebody? Is Bear Bachmeier still, who's committed to Stanford? Is he still a possibility? Is Plan B possible that they could get somebody, at least Bear Bachmeier's, which is a Rivals 250 guy, but not up to where Duce Knight is right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the reality of if Bear Bachmeier would flip. I think Stanford is a place that he really likes, and I mean, obviously, it seems like Notre Dame's program is in a better place than Stanford's program, but he's also from California too. So,
and he has a brother that plays at Stanford.
Yeah, and so I don't think it would be an easy flip. I have no idea how Bear Bachmeier feels about how things played out with him and Duce Knight at Notre Dame. I would imagine there'd be plenty of other options that Notre Dame can try to flip. And when Notre Dame tries to do that, it's not something that I can tell you right now. Like the part of flipping a recruit usually goes on behind the scenes. Like a lot of that work is done in secrecy, intentionally. I can even mention Raiden Vides-Bright, who is a wide receiver committed to Washington. Rivals national analyst John Garcia Jr. spoke to Raiden last week at IMG Academy, and he said, "Yeah, Notre Dame's been pushing really hard for me. I visited this summer." And that was news to me. And that was intentionally news that I did not know about. But sometimes, obviously, if the recruit talks about it, we're going to find out about it. But sometimes that information is sort of held under wraps in order to not raise any red flags at a place that the recruit is currently committed to. So I unless these quarterbacks want to outright talk about it, there might not be a lot to say about who Notre Dame is going after other than us sort of theorizing who are very good quarterbacks. But if Notre Dame goes out and has a good season and Riley Leonard balls, like there's no reason that Notre Dame has to settle at quarterback in this class. You can flip guys. Like Auburn and Ole Miss aren't the only schools that can flip recruits. I think Notre Dame will have the ability to do that if it wants to. And so I think that is something we'll continue to monitor moving forward.
Speaking of the Southern schools, I can't remember what the recruit's name is, but there's a guy that's gone back and forth between Auburn and Alabama twice each.
Yeah, Antonio Coleman, and Notre Dame actually kicked the tires on him, and I think that's a good decision that Notre Dame didn't get more involved than it was.
Okay, we're going to go to a lightning round with the questions to finish this show, but let me ask you one more here, recruiting-wise, just a kind of a real rapid fire. What's going on at safety, linebacker, and wide receiver? What's the headline for those three positions that Notre Dame's still trying to recruit in the 2025 class?
Yeah, I mentioned one of the wide receiver names already. There will be more. I think Notre Dame's going to try to get two more in this class to get 4 wide receivers in the class, and we'll continue to cover that over on Inside ND Sports and the Insider Lounge. The names are the same as the other positions: Madden Faremo, and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng at linebacker, and Brandon Logan at safety. Those are all guys that Notre Dame is pushing for and has a very legitimate chance to signing all 3 of those guys. So the work is not done there by any means, but those names remain the same in terms of priorities for Notre Dame at those positions.
As Tyler's surveying the questions to pick which ones he wants, I should mention in the coaches poll, Texas A&M came in at 20th. USC, another Notre Dame opponent, is 23rd. The highest ranked Notre Dame opponent is Florida State at number 10. There were 2 Notre Dame opponents receiving votes. One of them you would never guess. One is Louisville. They were almost in the top 25. And then Miami of Ohio received one vote, a 25th place vote. So, Tyler, let's do some lightning round here with the questions.
All right. Yeah, I have 3 submitted here. None Duce Knight related. So Bob Alvey asked, other than Jack Kaiser, which linebacker will get the most snaps at A&M?
I'm going to go with Jalen Sneed. I think Bowen and KVA, Kingston Viliamu Asa will kind of split some.
Yeah.
Jaden Osbury will play a lot. I think there's 5 that'll play a lot, but I'm going to go with Jalen Sneed as number 2.
Yeah, I would echo your same answer there. Ray Hallcraft asked, do you believe the staff is willing to play more players, offensive line and defensive line, during the season, given the length of the season, injuries, and the weaker teams on the schedule? Some players learn best by playing.
Definitely the defensive line. I mean, they can go 3 deep, I think, at all 4 positions.
Mm-hmm.
I think it gets a little bit when you're talking Cole Mullins and Armel Mucum, maybe against certain opponents, that's not as realistic. But when Bryce Young's your 3rd team field end and Boubacar Traore is theoretically the 3rd team, I mean, somebody really good is going to be the 3rd team Viper. I think that's very realistic. Offensive linemen, I mean, it's more garbage time. They have to foster the chemistry and the cohesion between that offensive line, and they're not going to want to, plug in pieces here and there if they're not all coming in together. I think you'll see the second offensive linemen come in, and if Northern Illinois and Purdue and Miami turn out to be blowouts, I think you'll see them at the end of those games. But I don't think they'll say, "Oh gosh, Billy Schrouth looks like he could use a break. Let's throw somebody else in there."
Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like I'm just saying yes. Good answer. But
good. I like to be affirmed.
But at the end of the show, I don't need to echo the same things you said. I'll just say, yeah, that's the same. And
just say right on, Eric.
The defensive line stuff isn't new, right? I mean, Notre Dame's been rotating on its defensive line for a long time. But yeah, I think the depth there is going to allow them to maybe go even deeper than it has.
And really, before. You'll see. I think, Ray, you'll see rotation at corner, you'll see rotation at safety, at linebackers we just talked about, tight ends, running backs, wide receivers. I think quarterback and the offensive line is where you won't see the rotation.
Yeah, and if there is a rotation on the offensive line, it's probably a sign that maybe you're not getting out of your starters what you would hope to. All right, last question. Brian Habermill asks, is ND doing one or position coaches at practice again? And he clarified in a follow-up that he's referring to media availability. I know you guys can't share much schedule-wise.
We get a shot at every coordinator at least once. I think we have the coordinators twice, and we have every position coach at some point. So I think as long as we don't say when practices are and what times they are, especially with all the construction going on, the last thing they want is people showing up looking for autographs with cranes and Wildcats and other things around. They don't even like us to be there.
Wildcats, the vehicles, not actual Wildcats.
Yeah, the Wildcat formation or actual Wildcats, yes, or Northwest.
Yeah, that would be more dangerous, Eric. The animal, not a running back and quarterback. Yeah, so we'll get a chance to talk to everyone. We're working our way through it. I believe, just off the top of my head, usually it's 2 coaches at the same press availability, and I think we've already talked to both coordinators and Marcus Freeman, and we'll talk to all of them once more before camp ends. All right, well, that is it for tonight's show. We appreciate everyone participating. A very lively chat tonight. Like I mentioned, a passionate bunch. I appreciate that. Hopefully, you guys are all still friends, or at least aren't trying to figure out where each other live after tonight's show. But if you're not a subscriber to our website, we hope you consider taking advantage of our 30-day free trial to InsideNDSports.com. Use promo code NDYT with the link to sign up in the video description below. We might not have as much good news as Notre Dame fans would like to hear this time of year, but I'm certainly happy to be back in our weekly mode here on Football Never Sleeps with both Eric and I in these chairs and these boxes, I suppose. We're scheduled to record an Inside ND Sports podcast on Thursday. That's what we're hoping to do, which you may have discovered. We've been uploading those as video list files here on YouTube as well, so you can catch the podcast in the YouTube feed if you prefer to take in your content through YouTube. Although you won't see our talking heads there. Some people were a little confused what was going on. Like, where are we at? Why couldn't they see us? I think someone even said they missed our pretty faces, Eric. So you look out for those things.
Wow.
We'll be back next week with another Football Never Sleeps. Anything you want to say before we get out of here, Eric?
Whoever said they missed our pretty faces, let me know your address. I'll send you a Tyler James autograph.
Just don't put it in the chat because some of these people were a little fired up tonight. So I don't know that you want everyone knowing your address. All right, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.